All right, everybody. Welcome to IETF in Yokohama, IETF116. You're in the EMU working group session. It's Peter and I are chairing this session. If we go to the next slide, we'll have the note well. You all should be familiarize yourself because you'll see this in every meeting session this week of what your obligations are as an IETF participant in terms of IPR and other processes. So as always, let's just try to keep our behavior professional in the meetings. Let's see, we don't have a terribly full agenda, but we do have a bit of things to talk about. I think we already have note takers. Are there folks in chat? If there's somebody who can reflect, thanks, Yoav. You all should also log in through the on-site meeting tool if you're on-site here, so your attendance gets recorded. So please do that as well. Can you hear me okay? Okay. All right, so I think we can jump into our first topic, which is TEEP. Alan?
Hello. We can check that works.
You can just pull the thing out.
That works. Okay. So TEEP has a lot of issues. We put a lot of work in the last few months to getting the document into shape. It now is a lot clearer. It reflects what people have implemented, but there's still a little more to do, which we need to talk about. So if we go to the next slide. We have interoperable implementations for some definition of interoperable, and I'll get to this a bit later. All the open errata have been addressed. The document is in about as good a shape as we know what to do. So next slide. Open issues. It looks like nobody has implemented the PKCS portions. I'm presuming Elliot wants those to stay in, which is probably a good idea. The question is whether we will have to go through another biz revision if we discover anything that's wrong in the document or will be implemented differently. I think some of the discussions about PKCS are not is addressed a bit by some of the other open issues, which I'll come to later. There's also the request action issue as raised by Elliot, which still needs some discussion. So if we go to the next slide. There's a big issue with TEEP. I've raised this on the list. There wasn't a lot of discussion. So normally what happens in an authentication method is the client goes to the server and says, this is my identity. And the server says, hello, identity. Let's do some kind of authentication. Inside the inner tunnel in TEEP, this does not happen. So the client connects and the server proposes either EAP or password authentication. And the question is, why would the server propose either one if it doesn't know who the client is? So you're stuck with either always doing EAP or always doing password, and then hoping that the client will go, no, I don't want to do that. I want to do the other one, which means at best, you have a couple of extra rounds, which are useless. At worst, the client gets a request for password authentication, says, I don't want to do this, and hangs up or gives a fatal error saying, no, 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 I want to do EAP.
Alan, you want to take questions now?
Sure, I'm happy to take questions now.
Good morning, everybody in Japan. And Alan, thanks again for doing this document. It's Elliot Lear here. The one issue, I think this one, when we looked at it, we said was, well, actually, you can make the decision based on how initialization happens in TEEP. So, for instance, if you look at, if the server looks at the cert, the server will have, if the client presents a cert, then the nature of the cert will provide a pretty strong hint as to what the end device is, and for that matter, who the endpoint is. And also, there's some odd circumstances, like if the client doesn't present a cert, you pretty much know, for instance, that the device is not going to be a machine. I'm sorry, it's not going to be a machine and so you get a lot of hints based on that TLS initialization. And maybe one of the things we should do is explore that and maybe write some of that down and really hard code it. All right, thanks.
Okay, so yes, if you do get a client cert in phase 1, you have an identity and you know something about what to do. If you don't get a client cert in phase 1, our tests were that it's possible for Windows, for example, to do machine authentication in phase 2 using EAP-TLS. So in the general case, TEEP sets up a TLS tunnel between the supplicant and the server, and then the server has no idea who it's connected to and has no idea what to do after that. So yes, there are cases where it does get some information, but in the general case, it does not. And so this is an open issue. So this is what I mean when I say there are interoperable implementations. They do something. If both ends agree in advance about what to do, then it works. But if they're in disagreement about what to do, then all kinds of bad things happen, and you really have almost no way to recover. And in some cases, as I'll come to, you really have very few ways to know what went wrong. So that's something which could be addressed. The other thing, and this is coming from my discussions with people implementing this as part of policies, how do you know what the other end wants to do or what the other end has? So let's say the server says, I want everyone to do machine and user authentication, but the supplicant is only configured with machine authentication or only configured with user. There's no way to signal that in advance other than the server proposes one and the client says no, right? Ideally, what should happen is the client should tell the server, I'm capable of doing these things, hopefully also with some identities for each one. And now the server has the appropriate information to make a decision, as opposed to the server gets a connection and the server goes, let's try to do machine authentication. Oh, that didn't work. I guess let's try to do user authentication, maybe with passwords. This does not provide a good user experience, and it makes debugging in policies very, very, very difficult. So next slide. So what actually happens with Windows? There's a bit of text here. If Windows has one set of credentials, and the server wants to do chained authentication. The server says, let's do machine authentication. It works. The client goes, great, I'm this host. We do EAP TLS. Everything's fine. The server says, now let's do user authentication with EAP. And the client sends an EAP identity with no identity, which presumably is a signal that it doesn't have those credentials. Arguably, if you look at the list of errors in the spec, there is no error saying, I don't have those credentials. There's an error, credentials are unavailable, but is that it's not able to get them, or does it mean I haven't been configured with them? And this is shipping in, pick a number, 100 million devices, right? So now all the servers have to be updated to look for this empty EAP identity and recognize it and verify, in fact, that yes, this empty EAP identity means that those credentials don't exist. I was trying to do user authentication, but now those credentials don't exist. So now it has to decide whether to reject the system for violating policies because the server wanted to do machine plus user, or does it want to let the user on the network, maybe put them in a captive VLAN? What happens here? It's not clear.
A question is this with basic password auth or with what
EAP.
kind of with
EAP.
EAP? So like any kind of EAP method, just asking for an
Machine-
EAP method. Got it.
Machine and user both trying to do some kind of EAP. So EAP TLS works for the host. You say, let's do EAP for the user, and Windows says, I have no identity. But there's no error. It just sends an empty EAP identity, which is somewhat confusing. It makes a twisted sort of sense. But it would be much better to get an actual error TLV saying, I do not have the requested identity. It's not that it is.
And you said we have an error TLV for credentials unavailable? Or?
Yes.
Okay.
But there's no description of what that means other than it means credentials unavailable. Does it mean, maybe that could mean that I asked the user for the credentials and it timed out when he tried to enter them, or I tried to get them from a one-time password system and that failed, right? There's a difference between unavailable and does not exist. I have no such information.
Why is that an important difference here? I mean, if they're unavailable, they're unavailable. Does it matter what the reason is?
Perhaps not. But I would argue that needs perhaps a little bit of clarification and some amount of pushback against implementations going, if you can't do something, please send an error. There's an error TLV defined with 20 values. Please send an error rather than just silently doing some very odd thing. So I guess this and the previous issues I talked about get into what do we want to do with this document. I think this document, as it exists today, other than the PKCS stuff, describes what has been implemented. It describes what works. We could arguably add a little bit of implementation experience going, by the way, here's what some people did. Be aware of it and please don't do that. I don't know we want to fix this document by addressing all of the issues. I think given what I'm hearing from people wanting to ship this and the fact that it has already shipped, there is some benefit to simply publishing this document and going, you know what, we know there are issues. This documents what's out there. So at least people can do something with it and implement it. Then I suspect we'll probably have to do a TEAP v2, which actually fixes all of these issues and addresses them. And then the question is, do we want to put the PKCS stuff in this document with a caveat that no one's implemented it, or push it out to TEAP v2 and go, we don't want to describe what to do until we know that it actually works? Elliot.
Elliot?
Okay, so we actually have code for the PKCS options. We've implemented in WPA supplicant. The only issue is that we did our code. I haven't gotten around to fixing this, but we did our code with the assumption that an intermediate result wouldn't be needed at the end of the exchange when you only have the final result coming through. So there's very modest changes. In fact, the way that we implemented other intermediate results was exactly how we landed in this draft, even before this draft was written. So we have like small changes to make, and I just haven't scheduled them in terms of the development. But the intent is to feed them right back to WPA supplicant. I think it would be a tremendous. Actually, I wouldn't see the value of TEEP without the PKCS operations at this point. So that's how important I think that they are. And you know, if push came to shove, for instance, I could handle the fact that if we had to push the CSR attributes TLV into a TEEP version 2, I could probably stomach that so long as we began work on it. And did try, and I agree with you, Alan, that we should try to fix a lot of these issues that that need to be addressed. But the PKCS operations really need to stay there. There's no other substantial way to renew certificates without having to go into L3 inside when it comes to EAT. So this is really it. And
okay, and my criteria here.
Yeah.
Go ahead. I was just going to say my criteria here is, does it work? If you have code that works, great, I'm happy to ship it. Because the issue we've had with TEEP is no one had code that worked, and so the spec was
absolutely
perhaps. Okay.
Dan Harkins. Yeah, I think that the PKCS stuff is critical too. In fact, the next draft we're talking about, the Bootstrap TLS stuff, depends on it. Also, we do need to add the CSR attributes TLV. That's very useful from EST. I think there has been some confusion about its use, but Michael Richardson is cleaning it up with a LAMPS draft. So I think we should just follow whatever his LAMPS draft ends up saying, and we should add that TLV as well. Thanks.
Can we get a PR for what changes we want, or do we have those changes queued up? No. Elliot, or somebody. Yeah.
Okay, so as the guy who's sort of been agitating for it, I didn't put the PR in myself. Alan actually has been doing a really good job of just actually synthesizing stuff when we've had an issue. But I'm happy to do that. I won't be able to do it this week because, as it happens, I'm working double shifts. But and you wouldn't like the result. But I think we could follow that through. I also want to do one thing when I provide it, which is I want to implement it in code to make sure that it looks clean. Now, there was one issue raised though on the list about this, which is when the message should be sent. In my opinion, it's one of these messages that can be transmitted unsolicited by the server, and it probably it should be attached to a request action frame, or in front of a request action frame for a PKCS 10 request. And that way the client gets the CSR attributes alongside, hey, it's time to renew. And there may be other times that it can be sent, like at the beginning of a transaction. And I think we discussed this a little bit on the list, but that would be something that we need to sort in the draft as well.
Okay. Well, if there's some more content, I'm happy to do the work to get that in.
Yeah. So I think, so let me just take, with regard to PKCS attributes, is there anybody who thinks it's not a good idea to include, or who thinks we need to take that out of the draft? If so, speak now. I mean, that's not my sense. I haven't heard anybody say that. I mean, other than like, we want to get this done and there's ambiguity around it and it'd be better to remove the ambiguity, but I think we should resolve that ambiguity in the positive direction here. So, yeah, the sooner, the sooner we can get text and resolve the kind of outstanding behaviors around the request action TLV, the better, because that's one of the issues. I think the other issue you brought up was this identity issue. Is there anybody here who would like to comment on that issue and whether, I know Elliot, you already did. Is there anybody else who, wants to comment for or against doing this identity piece to differentiate between machine auth and user auth?
Yeah, so the question is, do we want to add another TLV for this and perhaps also for the client to signal what it has available, even if nobody implements it? Because if it's there, we can upgrade the implementations to use it and it will just be better. I don't think it's that complicated. I mean, really, it's the proposal I had to the list was the client sends to the server a TLV, which is identity hint. And it has some identity, and now the server can decide what to do with that. Again, it's not critical, but it's the difference between it mostly works sort of versus, oh, I know exactly what's going on and I know what goes wrong.
Right. Elliot, did you want to comment on you had some comments in the chat?
Yeah, I have no problem with if people find it useful to add an identity TLV. I think that's it's not gonna it's really no problem to add. It's really simple from an implementation standpoint on the client side, right? You just, here's what I am, and the server can then make of it what it will, right? And take what actions it decides. One of the things that we should be considering is if we add it, we should just add a little bit of discussion as to the trust that the server might or might not put into that. But I don't think that's a lot of text. I think it's probably a small paragraph. Go on.
For me, that's why I wanted to call it identity hint, because if you get an identity that's not part of EAP or not part of the basic password auth, they could be different, right? And now all kinds of bad things happen. Whereas if you call it an identity hint, you know what? It's a hint if the actual identity you see in basic password or EAP is different, too bad. The hint is only used to select EAP or password. And then you do that other method, completely ignoring the hint.
Yeah, I was just going to add, I think you're right about that. And I think Max has a comment, maybe if you want to get in there, Max.
Hi, can you hear me, guys?
Yes.
Oh, okay. No, the comment was, this seems to me more like an identifier than an identity. So just a selector for, as you could say, like the server. Are you thinking about having any trust? Exactly as Elliot was saying, any trust in this, or just an identifier as an identifier?
Yeah, I don't think it should be trusted. It's just a way of selecting something else.
Perfect. Yeah, that's the way that I interpreted it. I just wanted to hear the confirmation. Thank you.
Okay, so I think we'd want to get a PR up for this one as well.
I'll do that today.
And then, we get these two things that will get us a long way. John, did you want to just briefly raise the issue posted in the chat?
Yeah. John Mattsson Eriksson. coming back to the TLS profiling, I mailed something some while ago, a bit harder. And I thought about what I really think. I see this now mentioned TLS 103. I'm fine with that. It also had, I'm also fine with if it still supports very weak crap for legacy interop. But I think what is needed to be able to publish this as a standard track in 2023 is one must support strong cipher suit. I would recommend the HTTP 2.1 with ECDHE and GCM. And then I don't know, if not all devices out there support that, that's fine. And there are, but I think the draft should, and RSC should definitely mandate that.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah, the current ciphers are copied from 10 years ago and have not been updated. Yeah, they should be updated.
And then I think it should refer to the BCP on TLS best practice. Maybe do it indirectly via some other draft now, but I think it would be good to mention that explicitly.
Okay. Yep.
I think the other thing that if anybody wants to help with is just validating that the errata are indeed addressed, or which ones are or not, just so we know where we stand with those. I'll be taking a look at that, but I could sure use some help if anybody wants to as well. We can coordinate on that.
Okay, I think that's it. I think the next slide was just questions. Yeah.
Let's see, there's another. Yeah, and so I think that we also need to resolve the issue of the error message, right? I don't know what needs to change, but I think we can take that discussion to the list.
For me, I mean, a little bit of extra text in the document, and given we've seen an implementation ignore the error TLV, perhaps adding another paragraph or something saying, this is what we've seen. Please don't do this. Please send an error rather than sending empty identities. And at some point, vendors can update their implementations. Okay, that's it for me.
Any other comments on TEEP?
You have near writes in the chat if RSA, if we specify a cipher suit in 2023, do we specify anything with RSA is the question. The alternative would be ECDSA. I don't know if it's, I suggested RSA now. I would be fine with that. ECDSA is maybe even better, but I don't know if there's a difference in migrating over. I guess it's RSA now.
You took it from the HTTP2 RFC, and that's by now 8 years old. It's from 2015. So yeah, if we were specifying it now, we'd probably go with something with either ECDSA or EDDSA, well, something a bit more modern. But there's nothing really wrong with RSA. I mean, they all fall and survive the same quantum computers, so it doesn't really matter.
So I'm happy to merge in a PR if someone lists some updated text for the cipher suites. Other than that. Okay.
Elliot?
Yeah, there is one thing. I mean, we should make sure that we're cleanly supporting, if we can, we should cleanly support CDSA. And the reason is that if you're on again, this comes back to my little IoT use case, and little is the word, right? Which is you really want to maintain small keys. So I'd like to take a look at that again and get back. Can we take that to the mailing list and get an answer on that one to the mailing list within a reasonable period of time?
Can you restate that, because you broke up? Was it ECDSA that you wanted to revisit, or what?
Yeah, I mean,
Okay.
I would like to look at. I haven't looked at that section of the document in any detail, and I'd like to just make sure that we can, we can implement a new encryption out that there's appropriate agility to implement ECDSA using the draft today. If there's not, then we need to review. But I think in Yoni's code, for somehow it works. So I don't know that there's a problem, but I'd just like to come back to that in the next couple of days on the mailing list if we can.
Yeah, I mean, I think we have a finite number of issues we're working through, and this is one of them. So we should try to do that. I think it's not a problem to negotiate it. I think it's just what do we have as the mandatory to implement or recommended ciphers.
Okay. And as I have the floor still, there's one other issue that I just wanted to touch on again, which I think Alan didn't cover, which is, you may have mentioned it, Alan, but just briefly, which was the ability to just send a request action frame up front. And we had a brief discussion of that on the mailing list. And my proposal is that when I do the work for the other work for this, I'll also put it in a PR for that, and that will make it a little more concrete for people to discuss. And I'll take into account people's concerns about when that frame can happen and whether or not it needs to be secured through a channel binding.
Okay, that would be great, because I think that those issues are kind of tied in with what you want to do with the PKCS TLV. So like if we can take all of those at once and come up with a good proposal, that would be good.
Yeah. I'll admit to a certain amount of laziness on this because Alan was doing such a good job. So now it's my turn, and I'll put in some text. You can look for it in the next week and a half.
Okay.
Thank you.
That's it.
Yep, thanks, Alan. Who's next? Bootstrap TLS authentication, Dan Harkins.
Good morning, everyone. My name is Dan Harkins, presenting on behalf of Owen Friel. Next slide, please. So this draft basically solves the problem of the catch-22 for onboarding, and that's basically the issue where you need a certificate to get on the network, but you need to get on the network to get a certificate. So how you solve that is kind of a hard problem. So what we propose to do is reuse the some of the bootstrapping methods from the device provisioning profile, device provisioning protocol. That's a typo. And reuse those bootstrapping methods to facilitate some trust in a key and use that for TLS authentication. It provides mutual authentication between the client and the server. The client proves knowledge of this public bootstrapping key and also possession of its the private key, and the server proves knowledge of the public bootstrapping key. It also authenticates with a certificate. We're just reusing existing RFCs and putting them together in a new and interesting way. We're not changing anything. We're not proposing any new extensions in TLS or in anything really. Next slide, please. So this is basically how the TLS portion works. So there's an out-of-band bootstrapping method where this public key is going to get shared, and it's going to get munged with HKDF 5869 and then the TLS importer 9258. So the server is then he's going to get all of these bootstrapping keys, and he's going to create a little database of imported identities and the corresponding EPSK that gets spit out by 9258. Then when the client goes to authenticate, he's going to add these new portions of the TLS handshake. They're in bold here. The plain text is what's in the normal TLS exchange, and the bold stuff is what's being added for this TLS authentication with bootstrapping keys. So the client's going to indicate that he's going to do cert with external PSK, that's 8773. He's going to be using a raw public key for his authentication, which is 7250. And then he's going to pass the imported identity blob that gets spit out of 9258. So the PSK then is going to be used that also gets spit out by 9258 to authenticate the TLS exchange. And then again, the server signs with a certificate and the client signs with the raw public key. Next slide, please. So this is how we're going to fold this into TEEP then. So basically the client's going to, his identity response is just going to be TLS poke at eepdpp.arpa. We're just going to define some name, and that's going to indicate that the client's going to is doing this DPP bootstrapping keys. The server's going to respond with a TLS start for TEEP, and then they're going to authenticate using the handshake that I just showed on the previous slide. Once authenticated, we're going to use those TLVs that we were just talking about from with Alan, the PKCS 10 and 7 exchange, to get a certificate installed on the client. I also would like to add the CSR attributes TLV, but we already discussed that. So once the client gets a certificate, then his subsequent connections to the network can just use that provision certificate. There's no point in doing this DPP bootstrapping again. It's just basically a one-off to get the client provisioned to get on the network. Next slide, please. So a new version came out 02, but it's not really very much different than 01. We did a little bit of cleanup. We fixed a stale reference, cleaned up some nits, tightened up some language. There was some discussion on the list from Hannes about a question on the 9258 interface, and he's wondering why we're doing this additional HKDF expansion of the bootstrapping key to get the EPSK and the EPSK ID, and thought that we could just get rid of that and use the bootstrapping key directly. So I guess he's kind of half right. We can get rid of one of those expansions. That stuff was added back when this is a independent submission, before it got adopted by the group, and before we started using 9258. So this is sort of stale text that we can get rid of, but we do need to keep the EPSK ID expansion, because that identity is going to be passed as part of the imported identity in the client hello, and if we don't want to use this blob that's going to be passed in the client hello, and also use that to derive a PSK out of it. So this is similar to what DPP does with what's called a chirp. It's for discovery. So instead of sending out your bootstrapping key, you send out a hash of the word chirp into bootstrapping keys. So what we're going to do is the EPSK is just going to be this HKDF expansion of this string TLS13B PSK identity and the bootstrapping key, and that's going to get stuck into the imported identity. So to address Hannes's comment, we're going to get rid of one of those expansions, but leave the second one. Next slide, please. So as I said, there really hasn't been any substantive changes in the protocol for a while. The TLS working group did review the changes we're proposing for doing this TLS handshaking. We do need to fix some additional references. For some reason, I think we cut and paste error. Eric Rescorla did not co-author the Resurrecting Duckling paper. And there's a new version of DPP out that we can refer to. We're also going to address Hannes's comment and remove one of those extraneous derivations. But I think that we're ready for a working group last call.
Okay. One thing I think I'd like to, so definitely publish a new document with the changes that you want to make.
Okay.
We also need to make sure that, we resolve this CS attribute thing in TEEP. It probably doesn't have a huge effect on your document, but
it's not critical, but
yeah.
as I said, it's very useful. It's useful for, we used it in EST, and I have found use for it.
Yeah, so I think we should, try to have that go forward, with kind of have those things linked in a sense.
Mm-hmm.
Because I think we're pretty far along with TEEP, and if we can get that attribute in, then we can have that reference, between the two documents and then move them forward together.
Okay.
But so we might be waiting on a last call for that, but chairs will get together and discuss.
Okay. No questions.
Yeah. Any questions on the doc?
Elliot.
Elliot.
Hey, just thanks, Dan, for this. What I was going to just say was, I don't think this document needs to wait for last call for the CSR attributes. I think the other document needs to wait for last call for the CSR attributes, but maybe I misunderstand the situation. And the second comment I have is just on Dan, if you'll go back one slide to Hannes's point. If you're putting in that last HKDF expand as an analog to the chirp, the only question is whether the chirp is. I guess that's needed if you're going to try and do this on a wireless network similarly. But I wasn't thinking in those terms, because if you're using this for wired, you probably don't need this, right? But for generalization purpose, maybe you do.
So yes, this is for wired only, but the issue is that since authentication hasn't happened yet, the client is sending his imported identity technically in the clear, even though it's probably not necessarily in the clear, but he's exposing his identity to somebody who he hasn't authenticated yet, and we don't want to use that identity as basically the PSK directly. So by hashing this, we're coming up with a derived identity that allows to identify the PSK and not say, here's my PSK, basically.
Okay, all right, I got you. I'm with you there. All right, thank you.
Okay, thank you.
All right, sounds good. Next, we have okay, John, you're up with EEP ad hoc.
So this is, we have EEP ad hoc. We have submitted a version 4. It's a collaboration between University of Murcia, University of Oviedo, and Ericsson. Next slide. First, some background. Why is this needed, and what is ad hoc, and what's the benefits of EEP ad hoc, and what have we done in the latest version, and what's the status? Next slide. So a little bit background. EEP have seen, there has been quite much interest in EEP in new industries, especially in IoT and also in 5G. EEP is now a major essential part of 5G, can be used for primary authentication or secondary authentication. Primary authentication is access authentication, and secondary authentication is on the application layer afterwards. And both of these can use any EEP method. What's missing is a lightweight EEP method for constrained IoT. Next. So benefits of ad hoc. Ad hoc is being standardized in the Lake working group, and the primary objective is to do something that looks like TLS but has much smaller message sizes. Also turns out it has a little bit smaller code size and a little bit easier processing, but the main goal is message sizes. Ad hoc also, compared to TLS 1.3, ad hoc has a fourth message. It fits actually, it looks, when TLS was made, we had to invent the fourth message. Here we get that fourth message automatically. What you also can do with ad hoc is that you can use X509 certificates bags, but you can also use CBOR web tokens or these CBOR encoded certificates. Basically, what kind of credentials you can use and how you identify them follows from COSI. So whenever COSI is standardizing something new, that would follow here. Next. Here is the exchange, the message flow. And if you knew TLS 103, this looks exactly the same. But of course, you have different context in the messages. The difference is the message sizes. The sizes for TLS with RPK, just the TLS, not the EAP thing, is 800 bytes. The message sizes for ad hoc is around 100 bytes. So drastic reduction. Of course, if you use 3K X509 change, then that doesn't matter. But if you use a RPK, you get significantly less total message sizes. And security properties are very similar. Mandatory forward secrecy with ephemeral Diffie-Hellman and identity protection. Next slide. What we have done in the draft is to more clearly, there was some discussion about what was the security property. Now we have illustrated that much better in the draft without that you have to go to the ad hoc draft. So there's mandatory mutual authentication, mandatory forward secrecy with ephemeral Diffie-Hellman, mandatory identity protection. You do have cipher suit negotiation and integrity protection. Next. Some possible additions that have been discussed. There's been quite a long discussion in EMU and in Lake, especially about resumption, and the Lake working group has been discussing. I think it's quite relatively positive to take on to do something here, but I think that is still to see. But you can see what has been written in this mailing list. It will also be discussed further in the Lake working group in this meeting. Next. So status, ad hoc is quite mature. Has not changed very much in the last year. It's now past the directorate reviews, and it will soon go out for IETF last call. If there are any changes, we don't expect them to affect EAP ad hoc on a high level. The draft is ready for implementation and interop testing, and there are some of the authors are working on implementation on different fronts. You can see hosted pad, free radius, and UD hoc OS core implementation. And we think this is ready for adoption. We think a lightweight, very lightweight EAP method, with lightweight meaning very, very small messages, is missing and something that's needed and good to have.
All right. Are there any questions?
Yeah, Dan Harkins, thanks for this. Can you go back to the EAP exchange slide? Yeah, that one. So after message 4, the peer sends out another EAP response, I guess, to sync up so he can get back a success from the server. What's in that message? Does he use the ad hoc derived keys in there to prove possession of the key, or is it just an empty?
It's just an empty dummy package to follow the
handshaking key.
TLS 103 do the same. It's just an empty. There's nothing in there as far as I can remember.
Okay.
Yeah, it's just to make the server be able to send EAP success visits. Yeah.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, if there aren't any other questions, what I'd like to do is get a sense of the room if this is an appropriate item for the EMU working group. Let me see how I run this. Ad hoc. Is this a good? This look okay? Okay, so I'm gonna open up a poll or a show of hands. So if you think that this is, I guess we'll run this to see if how many people think this is an appropriate item for the EMU working group, and then we'll follow up with a question if anybody objects to this as a working group item, just to get a sense. This is not a binding result, just a poll of the room, the virtual room. Okay, we'll give it a couple more seconds here. Yeah. So then I'm gonna stop this now. So the net result was there were 4 people who raised their hands. This is not a whole lot of support, so I think we'll have to, take any kind of thing to the list to see how many people are really willing to work on this, because it seems like very light participation and interest right now. Okay, is Mei Ling?
Oh, it's too high. Okay. Hi, folks. I'm Mei Chen from China Mobile. I would like a quick introduction for my draft, although I have not shared the draft first time. I changed the name IETF IBAS to IETF IBAS and to distinguish with the TIS. This method can avoid the overhead of receiving and processing certificate chains. And also with IBAS, signature algorithm do not need mapping table for publishing and identity. So it can eliminate the cost for mapping table establishment and maintenance at the server side. Indeed, a small table for certificate revocation list for revocated identity from accessing the network. Yeah. We have 2 use cases for the IETFs. One is for Internet of Things devices, and other for systems that do not support CA certificates, such like X.509, this kind of certificate. So the goal is to improve the authentication efficiency of the IoTs. This draft has been updated to version 5. I have presentation before, and we also have adoption call last year, but failed because there is not so many people interested about in IBS, so we now are still waiting for more interest. Another thing I have to say that for this draft, I have implemented the prototype in 2020, but not obsessed. So after last time adoption call and the presentations, I have received some comments both online and offline. The updates from version 4 to version 5. Next, yes. There are some modifications. I modified the mercer name. Yes, now it's IETF. And I also removed the sections for basic rule publishing, TLS exchange, and also the part for IETF mutual authentication with TS 1.3 handshake. And also, based on the new RFC comes out, so I update the reference RFC 9190 and 8446. I also add security considerations in my draft. This sentence, although the identity authentication has been extended, but the generation of session keys still continues the IETF method. Yes, this is a simple example. I use ECCSI used for the IETF in my draft. Signature algorithm was new added in IETF is defined in RFC 8446, and the signature algorithm set extension applies to signatures in certificates, and signature algorithm items were defined in TS 1.2. Applies to signatures in certificate verify messages. If no signature algorithm cert extension is present, then the signature algorithms extension also applies to signature appearing in certificates. In this sample, we can see server certificate type and client certificate type both varied with raw publishing. It means both two sides support raw publishing. And the ECCSI sure 200 to 256 is used for signature. Identity is loaded in the certificate field, and signature value is in the certificate verify field. If someone have read RFC 6507 may understand how the verification is completed in this example. Next slide 6. The authentication by identity-based signature, they have a prerequisite. The client and server have obtained the public private key pair from the same key manager system. The message server sent to client, they include public key signature, hash value of key management system, public parameters. And then when received the server's message, the client will processing the validation steps. First, validate hash value of key management system public methods to prove that they belong to the same algorithms and the same key manager system. Then the client verifies the identity of the server. They input identity message signature and key management systems public parameters to verify if they pass the authentication of server, then client will also send the message ID message and signature to the server. So if two sides authentication success, a successful message will sent. Next slide, thanks. Okay, I know it's something complex to understand the ECCSI, so I draw the figure here. You can see the red parameters here to see how it process the verification. Next, thanks. Next slide. Yes. Now we continue to wait for more people to interested and have to see open source implementation if someone like. And I also know that the new version of OpenSSL will support RPK, and I think maybe it's the trend that someone will also like to implement IETFs. And also I have a most important questions. How many people have read the document, and how many people interested about the method IBS used in IETF?
We can take a poll to see how many people have read
Yes.
the draft. I'll start a poll. EAP IBS, right? TIBS.
And I remember saying that Heikki would like to do the implementation on the service side. So if anyone interested in the implementation of the KIDE side, maybe can connect with Heikki.
So it looks like we have about 2 people who have read the draft who have responded, and 8 people who have not read the draft who have responded. That's obviously not everybody's responded, but so I mean, some folks have read this, but not a whole lot.
Okay. Okay, I will continue to promote my draft and wait for more interest. Thanks.
All right, next on our agenda was, let's see, is Michael Richardson on? Didn't see him. I don't see him in the room, because he was going to discuss EAP onboarding. Is anybody here involved in EAP onboarding and want to discuss it?
Yeah, this is Alan again. There haven't really been much updates to this. It's just, I guess, the question of who's read it. We talked about it at the previous IETF, I believe. And this really is about bootstrapping EAP again, because you don't have access to layer 3 networks. You'd like to be able to bootstrap yourself somehow. There is some overlap with TEEP, but perhaps not a lot. There isn't a lot new to talk about. So if people have seen it before, it is what it is. We will be working on some implementations of it soon. So hopefully we actually have concrete results at some point. Yeah.
Yeah, Dan Harkins. So I read the draft and it talks about using .11u. So you're planning on using this for wireless and not wired?
Both, hopefully.
Okay, so for wireless, is there a reason you're not doing like RFC 8110 opportunistic wireless encryption? So instead of you'll get the unauthenticated connection as part of your .11 association, instead of having to do an association and then do a whole bunch of EAP goo and to do a Diffie Hellman, it saves a lot of
We'll
stuff. I
take a
would
look.
think. Okay.
That's it.
All right. Yeah, so if people have interest in EAP onboarding, it would be good to discuss that as well. But that ends our regular scheduled agenda. We did have some discussion on the list around EAP AKA. I don't know, I know the folks are here, so if we wanted to have some discussion to try to resolve those issues, we could do that now. Does anybody, John, do you want to, or Mei Ling? I think both of you were discussing. It seems like one of the main open issues is whether we support post-quantum crypto. Is that the main sticking point? I haven't had a chance to catch up with the latest discussion.
Yeah, so John here. Yeah, I think the discussion most was about the wording of any future PQC. Please correct me if you think I haven't been super involved in discussion. Carl felt that his view was seems to be aligning. I think some updates, but no major technical updates. Adding PQC would be later.
Yeah, I think that would be a separate work effort.
Yeah. Then how much work that would be, whether it would be super easy or any changes needed. But I think you register a new group. Then there's some directorate reviews and some other review from Carl, which is an author. So I think the plan is to update based on the comments and make a new revision. Yeah.
Okay, great. Mei Ling, did you have any additions to bring up with regards to that discussion, or?
Yes, from today's topics, I have seen so many RPK, yes, Republicans, they have a hot topic. So I do not understand why identity-based signature used in ETLs, why it's not so many people interested, because the vote just the two people have read their document. So what's the problem when I promote my draft? Maybe this question is something like stupid. So is the question is IBS used in ETLs, they do not suitable, or just the people do not read my draft, so they do not understand, or they do pay the time on this topic. So I do know how to continue with this job.
Yeah, so I wanted to discuss first if there was anything else you needed to, if we're closing on the EAP AKA PFS draft. I think were you involved in that discussion or not? Yeah. So with regard to the EAP AKA PFS, do you have any?
Yes, APK PFS. As the mailing list, I have some questions about the QKD that on the forward security function in the AK. So if I see the most difference we make the understanding of the PFS is we concern about the future algorithms that will used in the in different human based PQD, right? So in this stage, I think if AKPFs, maybe it can satisfy the requirements, but I just want to make it concise more in the future.
Okay. Thanks. And with regard to TIBs, we should, right now there may not be support in the working group. And so depending on what your goals are, we can discuss, because you can, if you want to publish a document, there are other ways of doing that. Or if you, want to have more implementation experience, that's a different sort of route. So we can kind of, help you with some of those options to see, what your goals are and what you might be able to achieve in a shorter term. Any other topics for EMU this time around? If not,
John Mattsson, Ericsson. I was contacted by several people offline the last half year regarding the draft Mattsson, old draft Mattsson draft for TLS with PSK. Several people asking what the status was. I followed up to at least one of the people asking what their use case was, but didn't really get an answer. When that was discussed before, I don't know, some different opinions of motivation. One was to use PSK with CERT. I think my view was to just chip something. This is IETF, but you can use PSK also and be done with it. I think Mohit that actually wrote the draft, even if it says Mattsson, I don't know why it says Mattsson actually, wanted to do something very IoT focused. I think that was more or less the conclusion in the discussion that discussed this. I think there was interest there, but I think I don't think TLS with PSK makes so much sense for IoT. I think ad hoc or CTLS would be better options, much more lightweight. But yeah, I don't know if anybody has any opinion about TLS with PSK. Now we have this bootstrapping draft also, but that's a bit more specific and not just a plain TLS with PSK.
So this is Alan. I haven't looked at that in detail. On one hand, I mean, EAP-TLS supports PSK allegedly already. I have to understand why. It certainly is useful to support systems other than certificates, because those are just a nightmare to manage. Yeah, looks like a good idea. I'll have to look at it in detail.
Max, I see you posted something in the chat. If you want to just bring that up at the mic, you can. We have time.
Hi guys, hi everybody. Sorry for not being there. I really wanted to be, but so I just wanted to let you know. So we are continuing our work. Some of you, we discussed with some of you the work that we did for EAP creds. This is just a proposal that we brought some time ago, and then we actually didn't have the resources to fully continue the work at the IETF, but we did some internal work to continue to investigate, the use of this tool. This is a proposal for a managing of credential, right? So not for authentication. So it's a weird mechanism from that point of view, right? So, but it goes in the same directions that other mechanisms, like the bootstrapping or the TIP has some elements of that. One of the things that we actually tried to do is to remove the authentication part, like, assuming, because our use cases, usually involve situation where devices are connected to the network and there's already being an authentication. So there's already some security going on. The idea here is that we, usually these credentials, once is even bootstrapped, right? One is deployed, they tend to be very static. And one thing that we are looking into, especially in some use cases that we see in convergence projects that we are running across, Wi-Fi, wired, and 3GPP type of networks, could be very useful to have a policy that allows you to define, get me this security level, and then forget about everything else. And so IPCREDS comes in and basically does all those activities that usually nobody really likes to do. Try to connect with renewals if you have certificates. Try to renew your password with password services that you have. And the idea is that allows you to keep the same level of risk level, right? Define whatever your policy is in those credentials that tend to be, not your application layer, not your bootstrapping credential. Those are that are in the middle, that are provisioned when the devices come on network, for example, online. And those are usually very, very difficult to manage. And so this is the type of work that we are doing, thinking about. Maybe there's possibility to ease users with the username and passwords and different type of authentications that they might see or might need for the network. So this is something that I think it's already been standardized in some environments like CBRS, so city broadband. So it's something that we are working on. So if you're interested in working, or you're curious about what we have and what our plans are, please let us know. We really want to bring back the work here and the working group when there's time for the work group to take this on. And we are, so far we really we see some good use cases. So please, if you are interested, let us know. We'll be very happy to collaborate. We have some new resources, so we hope that this work can progress forward. Hopefully with some running code soon, so to demonstrate some very, very common use cases. So this is what I wanted to add. Thank you for the occasion, for just this little extra comment. Thank you.
Okay, no problem. All right. Anybody have any other topics? Going once, going twice, sold. So we'll see you all next meeting, but we'll have lots to do on the list to get our current work items on their way before the next IETF. So thank you very much. Yeah, maybe he had a conflict. I mean, if he's in East Coast or something. How's it going? We'll have so yes, Margaret is on a plane. I think she is here tomorrow. So Andrew, we have it right now. All probably privacy hats pushed up full. My interest. I'm good. I can barely. I wanted to attend the most one. My show that me. I'm just trying to get it all pushed out. Right, I'll be the front man. The lightning rod for whatever. I think a lot of it is fairly non-controversial. My main worry is from the boba sometimes. It'll be difficult, but he's been pretty good.
I am in the right time zone. Oh yeah, what? Yeah, I don't. No. Yeah, that's good. That's true. That's true.
How do I get on that?
Yeah, I forgot what it was. But anyway, sake sounds good.
I hope so.
But first now I'll go get my coffee because Craig on the first floor is because the IESG meeting started before the blue bottle opens. Like,
And now maybe we go up.
there is a blue bottle here, right? Yeah, just 5 minutes outside of the hotel at the north entrance.
But it's the only thing that actually was letting people engine from the agency as well. Somehow wants to have